And turning to our program now, please welcome David Haynes, former lead for the Wisconsin Alliance for Civic Trust and Ideas Lab editor for the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, to introduce our speakers.
Well, thank you, President Kent. While our speakers are getting settled, let me introduce them. Our guests today are the Wisconsin leads for the Democracy Defense Project. Mayor Barrett and Representative Klug will explain that project in some detail, and we'll have a conversation. But it aims broadly to do three things: foster greater confidence in election results, improve voter participation, and move beyond the polarizing rhetoric. I think we can all agree to all three of those. But let's meet our speakers. In many ways, they don't need to be introduced, but I'm going to do it anyway. Mayor Tom Barrett dedicated nearly 4 decades to public service, first in the Wisconsin State Assembly and State Senate, later in the U.S. House of Representatives, then, of course, as our mayor for many years, from 2004 to 2021. A Milwaukee native, Mayor Barrett also ran twice for governor of Wisconsin and served as a leading Democratic voice in our state. And finally, last but not least, he was the ambassador for the United States to Luxembourg, and we heard him talk about that recently. Representative Scott Klug is a lobbyist, author, and businessman, as well as a former politician who served in the U.S. House from 1991 to 1999, representing Wisconsin's 2nd Congressional District, the Madison area. Before his time in Congress, he spent 14 years as a television reporter and anchor in markets including Seattle, Madison, and Washington, D.C. After leaving Congress, Representative Klug worked in public affairs, business leadership, and writing, and he authored a mystery novel called The Alliance, which we won't be talking about today, but you should read it. Fun fact, the two of them also have known each other since high school. They both went to Marquette University High School. I think you were your part, is that right? Okay. Now we have that cleared up. So here's how this will go. Both of our speakers will take 5 minutes or so to talk about their role in the project, how they came to it and so forth. Then I'll have a brief conversation with them, and then the rest of the time's really for you to ask your questions. So let's start with Mayor Barrett.
Well, thank you very much, David, and good afternoon. It's always great to be here. I've always loved coming to Rotary because it's the town hall, and Mary, congratulations again. The leader of the town hall is going to be moving on to her new chapter, and you've done a wonderful, wonderful job. So when I came back from Luxembourg about 15 months ago, I became a full-time leisure specialist. And I tried desperately to become my wife's personal assistant and have been failing miserably in that regard for the last year or so. But obviously, I still have the needle in my arm a little bit when it comes to public policy and politics. And back in October, I saw a press release or an article with Scott and Mike Tate, two of the board directors for this organization. And I looked at it and I thought, now that looks interesting. A bipartisan effort to create trust, foster trust, and continue trust in our election process. Nothing comes closer to the heart of our democracy than how our elections are conducted, and equally important, whether people trust the outcome of those elections. And so I looked at that with a little jealousy, thinking, well, why didn't anybody ever call me about this? This looks like something cool that I'd like. Well, then about 6 weeks later, I got a phone call because Mandela Barnes, who had been previously in the role that I have, stepped down when he became a candidate for governor. And I jumped at the opportunity to become part of this team. So I want to compliment, first of all, Scott and J.B. Van Hollen. They are the two Republicans. Mike Tate and I are the two Democrats. And I believe that this is frankly a little harder lift for Republicans because a lot of the political noise we're hearing out of Washington, D.C. is not in accordance with what we are trying to do. For me, it's in my wheelhouse to say, well, let's do everything we can here. But Scott, thank you, and JB for doing what you're doing. So yesterday, Scott and I were in Oshkosh, and David was there, and it was maybe 100 people at this conference, and they had breakout sessions, and ours was one of the breakout sections. And we asked ahead of time, well, are people going to come to our breakout session? They said, oh yeah, there'll be a lot of interest. Well, when I got to the conference, I saw that the title of our breakout session was How Elections Are Conducted in Wisconsin. And I thought, oh, that's a winner. That's a winner.
Clearly, we have to work on our marketing.
And sure enough, we had a small but committed group of about a dozen people. And the other room probably had 80 people. Afterwards, I said to my wife, they should have titled it Sex, Escapades, and Elections. And we would have had standing room only, but that's not what they chose to call it. But we had a good conversation. And I mentioned how elections are run in Wisconsin, because when I was mayor, one of the things I strived for every single election we held was that it would be the most boring day of the year for city government. And I preached this, I don't ever want the news on election day to be how the election was run. I want the news to be who won and who lost. If the election's about us, the city, or the poll workers, or the number of ballots, or problems at the polls, we've lost. So I thrive on boredom when it comes to elections, because we need to make sure that people trust it. So this effort, as boring as it may sound, I think goes to the heart of our democracy. Because we have to, on the 250th anniversary of our nation, we have to instill, and in many instances, reinstill confidence in our elections and make sure that they're done in a way that people trust. That's how our democracy is going to survive, and that's what we're committed to. So I could talk for hours and hours on this, but I'm going to turn it over to my partner, Scott Klug, and it's great to see Scott and to work together once again. So here's Scott Klug.
Yeah, Tom, it's always fun in the early years of being semi-retired. Tess looked at me across the table early one morning and said, great, I love you for better or worse, but not for lunch. Figure out something else to do. So as Tom said, we are just one of 8 states that are involved in this effort. And similarly, there are co-chairs, Republicans and Democrats in all the states. I was just at Penn State doing a program for former members of Congress with Richard Sweat, who was a classmate of mine from New Hampshire. He's the Democratic chair in New Hampshire, and his Republican colleague is actually the guy who beat him and ended his political career. But that's an important message to send to people, that you win, you lose, you have to figure out a way to get this done. It's an interesting time in American politics, and folks look at this time and say, there's never been anything like this, except there were 5 straight elections after the Civil War where nobody got more than 50% of the vote. 3 people were elected to the presidency only because of the Electoral College. They lost the popular vote. 2 presidents were killed after Abraham Lincoln in that next 50 years. So I just want you to put perspective on. Those of us who are a certain age will always look back and try to tell my kids, and now my grandkids, how crazy the 1960s were. But the 1860s were frankly even crazier than the 1960s were. So sort of keep some sense of perspective on that. And what we're really working on is traveling the state of Wisconsin to essentially say the election system works here and works well and has for a long time. There are 2,800 clerks in Wisconsin. So when people talk about nationalizing federal elections, my mother-in-law was an election clerk in Merrill, Wisconsin for 35 years. And that's who really staffs the elections around here. And when you look at some of the claims about fraud, let me sort of, as the Republican in the room, might be the only Republican in the room, let's talk about the election in 2020. If you go home tonight and pull a blue book off your shelf, in which case you really need a hobby and a life, but if you look at the blue book, it will show you that if you look at the election, Donald Trump lost to Joe Biden by 30,000 votes. And so there are the allegations about fraud, and we're going to talk at some point, I think, about Milwaukee and the fact we don't count ballots until after the polls close, which has created most of the mythology in Wisconsin. But if you look, Donald Trump lost to Biden by 30,000 votes. Check all the votes in the state of Wisconsin for Republican congressional candidates. And if Donald Trump had gotten that same number of votes, he would have won Wisconsin by 20,000 votes. So the numbers when you talk about election fraud are staggering. And if you look at Scott Walker's recall race, which went to a recount, I think at that point there were maybe 182 votes that moved. So that's the message we're really out here to deliver, is that we've got a great system in place. I'd always trust somebody who lives in Merrill than somebody in Chevy Chase, Maryland, to figure out how this sessional election works. And I want to send a personal note before I forget to do this, that thank you for not being a Rotary Club that makes its guests sing.
No singing today, although some days we do sing. So I cited the three broad goals of the project in my introduction. One of them is moving beyond polarizing rhetoric and lies. Important goal, but how do we do that in an environment where facts seem to matter a lot less than they used to?
Well, the short answer is you talk to people who are intelligent and reasonable and understand that there is not this gigantic conspiracy going on, and you hope that they carry the message to their family and neighbors and friends. Clearly, there's heated political rhetoric about this, and there was recently a market poll that came out, and a significant number of people said they trust local elections more than having them run at the federal level. So we patted each other on the back and said, look, we're on the right side of this. We're on the right side of this. People want to have their elections run locally. But at the same time, the polls show that 44% of the people doubted whether local elections were always fair. So there's a significant group of people in our state, in our nation, who think that everything is rigged. And as Scott said, the number of clerks, the polling places, 2,700 polling places, I firmly believe that these people, and I would ask you next time you vote, to thank the people who are running the polls. This is not a glamorous assignment, and quite honestly, and I'm sure if you had clerks here, they would tell you that they have never felt so threatened in their careers as they do right now. That's the reality of what's going on right now. And so what we are trying to do on a bipartisan basis is instill this confidence, and it's work. It is work to do that. When I, again, got the call for this organization, I looked at the website, and I saw the people in other states that were doing this, and I thought, this is totally legit. This is an organization that's committed to creating a sense of democracy and making sure people understand that this system is stronger because we have so many people at the local level involved. And it would be a lot less strong, as Scott said, if this was being run from Washington and Chevy Chase.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So I want to ask a show of hands in this room, just out of curiosity. How many folks have had a falling out with either friends or families over politics? Yeah, it's sad, it's everywhere. So my favorite story actually comes from a woman named Tammy Pfeiffer. She used to be the lieutenant governor of Utah. She actually was a school teacher for years. Classic sort of political story. Got mad about something going on in her subdivision, ran for the city council, then suddenly ended up in the legislature, then suddenly ended up the head of public instruction in Utah. But Thanksgiving 2017, she's got 5 kids, and they are in birth order, amazingly, a Republican, a Democrat, a Democratic Socialist, an Independent, and a Libertarian. Well, that's entertaining, except it's 2019. It's COVID shutdown era. 2 of her daughters are teachers. 2 of the boys are much more conservative. And they couldn't even get the turkey out of the kitchen before the kids walked out the door. And it took them a year to patch that up. So for Tammy and for a lot of us, it's deeply personal, and it's hard to figure out a way to get around it. But Tammy actually ended up doing something which I think is interesting, although unfortunately the punchline isn't that great. She worked with folks at Utah State over the course of years to develop a scoring system for people's political rhetoric. If Tom and I are in an election together and I go, yeah, I don't agree with you at that point in immigration, but we should work on that other thing. That's the way the system's supposed to work. Instead of saying, you knucklehead, if that happens, the whole country's going to hell, and it's you and all your buddies in the Democratic Party who did it. And that's what happens in those kind of, so she figured out a scoring system on political civility. And she now circulates it, and they're trying to perfect it so they can be used to score candidates in the future. And that's the sort of thing we need. And if you look around the country, there are lots of groups. Unite's a big one out of Washington, D.C. There was a group for a while called Make America Dinner Again. And the idea was you had to invite 12 people to dinner, 6 Republicans and 6 Democrats, and agree to have a civil conversation. So there are these little grassroots and shoots that are sort of sprouting up around the country. And I think it's going to change, and it has to change, or we'll tear each other apart, and it's got to end.
Getting back to that grassroots issue you just brought up, when we went around the state 2 years ago with WISACT, I actually saw a lot of green shoots, and it was really encouraging. Are you seeing that when you get out into the state as well? Hopeful signs.
Yeah, no, I do. I mean, you got a couple of people actually at this group, and there are similar groups like the Scott McCallum, former lieutenant governor, is involved with a group in Wisconsin. This has really gone on all the country. If you look at those slides, you'll see, Saxy Chambliss, former Republican senator from Georgia, is leading the Georgia group. There's a lot of us, but the problem is, and I've run into a bunch of folks today connected to the Milwaukee Journal, the newspapers, the radio stations aren't the issue. It's the internet, right? And it takes you down whatever dark hole you want to go into. Fortunately, I left the house this morning before my wife had an opportunity to turn the computer on, because I know how the morning would have gone partly. But people feel very passionate about this, and whatever you hear reinforces what you want to hear, right? And so that's why Tom and I, people who've spent careers in public service, really feel an obligation to go out to talk to people like that, in the sense that maybe after this meeting gets done, sometimes over the weekend you pick up the phone and call the friend or the family member, and that's how the healing is going to start one by one.
We're sort of marriage counselors and family counselors at the same time.
So let's move to, you focus a lot on election integrity and restoring faith in our system. Are there structural things that, say, the legislature could do to help?
Well, here in Milwaukee, as Scott alluded to, we are sort of the ground zero for a lot of the dispute. And the dispute is over the way we count ballots in the city of Milwaukee, the largest city in the state. And by state law, we are not permitted to count votes, the absentee votes, until after the close of business on Election Day. This creates an enormous challenge because we've used businesses, we've used civic buildings, we've used warehouses, where we have literally hundreds of people, depending on the election, who come together and in our central count to count these votes. And for years, we pleaded with the legislature to change this law. And they have not done so. And there was a bill, bipartisan bill, clerks from all over the state saying, this is common sense, change this law, allow the processing to occur earlier. And this is, I'm generally not a conspiracy theory buff, but I really think this. If I were to ask the people who killed the bill why they killed it, I think if we had a lot of beer and they were being honest, they'd say, because it makes the city of Milwaukee look bad. And we can then make you the boogeyman in elections. And from my point as mayor, again, going back to my first point, at 2 a.m., what I love to do is sleep. I don't like being downtown, counting ballots and making sure that there are no problems. If I'm thriving on boredom, which I said I am, I don't want the story to be how they're counted. And so I personally, when I was mayor, felt I had greater desire to have this changed than anybody. And I'll tell you, this goes again to the real world applications. In 2018, when Tony Evers beat Scott Walker, and in 2020, when Joe Biden defeated President Trump in Wisconsin by 30,000 votes, at 10 o'clock, I could see the results coming in, and I saw in both instances that the Republican had a slight lead. And in both instances, I thought, election's over. The Democrat's going to win. Because I knew that the votes from my city, 70%, 71% Democratic, had not come in yet. And so obviously, as a partisan, I was happy with that. But as a citizen, I don't like this dramatic swing at the end of the evening. It's not good. It's not good for the system. So that is probably the most glaring one. The second one is these drop boxes, the ballot boxes, which I'm a big believer in. But I think right now there are no rules to them. Some communities like them, some communities don't like them. There's a partisan fight over that. I think there needs to be a structure around those as well.
I'm sorry, back to the pre-processing, the counting. They didn't actually recommend counting the ballots before the polls closed, right? It was opening them up and doing the processing that needs to be done to get them ready to count.
Yeah, and so I like to remind my Republican colleagues that if you take a look, it drives me crazy on election night. So Florida and Texas, two very Republican states, both start counting days ahead, the Thursday or Friday before the election. The ballots are sealed, and it's nuts. And I remember all the controversy in Miami and Fort Lauderdale and the Chads and all that stuff. Florida's completely squeaky clean right now. They'll announce their results hours before Wisconsin does. The other thing Wisconsin could do, which is sort of half a step, which Minnesota and California do, is they open up the ballots the week beforehand to validate that they're valid votes. Because you have to sign them, you have to date them, it's got to be sealed, all that stuff. So then when you hit 8, you can start sticking them in machines instead of poor clerks opening us up at 8:01 and trying to deal with, tens of thousands of votes as happening in Wisconsin. Now I'll tell you my favorite reform project. I'm a very lonely wolf on this one. Nebraska. They finally figured out football. They finally figured out basketball. The football team's got ways to go. Nebraska subpoenas election workers. So just as you get subpoenaed for jury duty, you get subpoenaed to work in an election, and you've got to work for them. So it could be a school board election, could be a special election, a county board election. They don't care. And if you don't turn up, you get arrested and you get fined. And it's not infrequent that they won't throw 1 or 2 people in jail for 8 hours just to sort of make the point. So this fall, 40% of the people working on elections in Nebraska will only be there because they didn't want to get arrested. But here's the cool thing about the conspiracy, right? You want to pull off a conspiracy? Let's see you do it with 40% of the people in the room who don't even hell want to be there to begin with, without suddenly moving numbers around and ballots around. Utah's the only state that does it, but I actually think it's a great model for the country. So.
Let's return to I think it's called the SAVE Act, right? That would federalize oversight of elections. I think you've indicated opposition to that, not surprisingly, but can you explain why, especially given Wisconsin's really decentralized system?
I don't know that much about it. Yeah, you can recognize very clearly people who are tap dancing if we try to do this. I think that the major issue is federalizing elections. I don't have any problems with voter ID. Wisconsin's had it forever. I don't know all the details that are in there. I mean, if you can't pass a bill to fund the TSA workers, I'm not really sure suddenly that's going to get passed in the next couple of months.
Well, in Wisconsin, as we all know, we went through the debate over the photo ID years ago. So whether you like it or don't like it, the voters approved it and the constitutional change took place. That's the law of the state of Wisconsin right now. So when I saw some of the backers from Wisconsin who were saying, we need this, I'm thinking, well, we already have it in Wisconsin. Well, what's the big deal? But there are other provisions having to do with registration, provisions that, as I understand it, affect women who take their husband's name and having access to documents that can prove who they are, that disproportionately this is going to have an impact on married women who don't carry around a birth certificate with their maiden name. And you can imagine how that would happen. It's the same issue with college students, and they're moving around, young people. And so I think that this is a remedy that is in search of a problem. I think that the tension that is always there and should always be there is, I think most, if not everybody in this room, wants to have fair elections. You don't want to have fraud. So we have to, of course, take the steps to make sure there's no fraud. The other side of that record album is we want to make sure that everyone who is eligible to vote is given the right to vote. and not denying people who are eligible the right to vote. And that's where I think this pendulum with the SAVE Act is moving too far in the direction of having people who have the right to vote who will be denied that right.
You might want to take a minute for some of the younger people in the audience to explain what a record album is.
Okay.
Well, speaking of younger people, you were just on a college campus yesterday talking to a bunch of young people. I wonder what you would say to people who have come of age and only known a politics that was chaotic and often pretty mean-spirited.
You got to be in the game. You got to be in the game. This democracy is going to go on, and I think there are a lot of people who would love to have a certain demographic, and everybody has a different demographic, where they want to convince them not to vote. And for younger people, you have to do it. What I always throughout my career worked on the assumption was that 20% of the 20-year-olds voted, 30% of the 30-year-olds, 40% go up to 80% of the 80-year-olds, and they vote like there's no tomorrow, because for many of them, there's no tomorrow. But I think as people age, they are more invested in the community, but you have to be part of it. If you can't just sit around and complain.
Let's go to questions from the audience. I just think that's the more interesting thing here, rather than just doing.
I just have one more for the two of you, and then we'll move to the audience. What have you learned from each other as you've begun to work together on this process?
Well, Scott and I both have dyed our hair white so that we can be statesmen and not politicians, because we've gotten to the age, we used to be the young guys in the room. Things change.
Well, I mean, we worked together when we were in Congress. I mean, you know, Republicans and Democrats are often on opposite sides of issues, but in the case of the Wisconsin delegation, if it's anything to do with Wisconsin, there's always unanimity, and we'll do whatever the state asks. And so we developed a working relationship back then, and I can tell you that a lot of delegations I know, there's a lot of rancor that goes on, and that's never been that way with Wisconsin. And so Tom and I have known each other well, played against each other in baseball, played against each other in basketball. This is my wife used to ask, do you vote? Are you doing any actual work? And so that's the way friendships are built, and that's, so Tom and I have worked together since the 1990s.
So one more follow-up on that. The 1990s, very different era in Congress. What was it like then versus what it seems to be like now?
Well, let's not look back longingly. My first vote in Congress was Desert Storm, and I represent, anti-war Madison. Then my last vote in Congress was the impeachment of Bill Clinton. And in between, there were lots of fights with Newt Gingrich and people along the way. I don't think there's ever been a great sort of magical, happy time in American politics. I mean, people look at gerrymandering and saying everybody's goofing things up with gerrymandering. It's actually named after a guy whose name was Jerry Mander, who signed the Declaration of Independence and who created the first district, one of the first special line drawing in the country so James Madison could get elected, and the district looked like a salamander. So that's how the name gerrymander came about. So we're back there. I meant, Aaron Burr shooting at Alexander Hamilton, and during the Civil War, people are fighting with each other with swords on the floor. So it's never been this sort of magical, beautiful time. It's always tough. I think the internet, though, has spiked the partisanship and the harshness in a way it never does before. And people will say things on the internet they'd never say to one another at the tables here. And that, I find I've got friends doing this, like, who are you arguing with, You're arguing with somebody who could be a 13-year-old in the Philippines. I mean, why? And if you can't find it on political sites, you're welcome to turn on any sports site, because it's equally the same with people on both sides. So I don't believe there was sort of a magical Camelot time in American politics. It's always been rough and tumble.
And I couldn't agree more. I think I came in one session after Scott, and he talked about playing basketball. I remember there'd be a break late in the afternoon where you could play basketball, and you didn't care whether you were playing with a Democrat or Republican. I used to joke that I played 6 weeks before I saw the first assist. This is not a group of people who want to make somebody else look good. They just, I got the ball, I'm shooting. But I came at the final 2 years of a 40-year run of Democrats being in control. And I can tell you the chairs of those committees, the appropriations committees and the Ways and Means Committee, They wouldn't have known me if they had stepped on me. We were the same party. And I used to joke somewhat that the major difference on a day-to-day basis when Newt Gingrich came in with this revolution in 1994 was instead of having the Democratic leadership ignore me, the Republican leadership ignored me because I was from the safe seat in the Midwest. But again, there was rancor. There was a lot of rancor there. So it's the good old days are not always the good old days.
Great. And with that, let's go to questions.
Thanks, Mayor Barrett. Representative Judd. Oh my God. I am so sorry.
We can hear you.
I'm Carol Alexander. I am the moderator today. For those of you who are guests, as you can see, we have people here that are lined up to ask questions. Questions are 30 seconds. I do have my timer. Please keep it respectful and appropriate. Thank you.
Well, thank you both for being here today. I've had a lot of discussions on this, and the thing that bothers me the most is, and this may require a follow-up, is that if we can use data mining for cryptocurrency, we're smart people. Why can't we do the same method for voting? Because that is an incredible, intense system that no one's been able to break, because it's tied into several computers and whatnot. So has that come up as a way to create voting so I could vote today using cryptocurrency?
So yesterday I was listening to a podcast from The Economist magazine about what's the company that just broke with the federal government and the dangers of AI. And one of the things they pointed to was the hacking that can now occur with AI, and that there were 190 million people, Mexican people, whose election information was hacked. I would argue I do not want the federal government to be the depository for all that information. I think going back to the notion that this is working because we have people in Merrill, Wisconsin, or in Fond du Lac, or in Lac de Flambeau that are there. They are, in my mind, without a doubt, the strongest safeguards for democracy because they care. And when those village clerks, those 85-year-old women who I love, when those votes are tabulated, they're watching very carefully to make sure that the county is counting them correctly. And those 75-year-old women and men at the county level are making sure very carefully that they're counted correctly at the state level. So I think that this very diffused method makes it an incredibly stronger system than having somebody who can hack this. Because yes, Bitcoin is important, but we read these horror stories about systems being hacked. I want to trust it. I want to trust it, and I trust it a lot more than somebody who has got access to all that. That's my personal opinion.
I'll tell you a quick story. In 2002, I was an election observer in Iraq. And we're on our way to, there were 6 of us that were part of an election monitoring group, 2 Canadian members of parliament, 2 people from the EU, a Swedish guy and a British guy, and then myself and Jim Slattery, who's a Democrat from Kansas. Anyway, we're on our way to this polling booth, and you're in sort of these convoys to go. And sitting in the back seat with me is a Lebanese woman, and we started to talk about Middle Eastern food. So she asked me, have you ever had Iraqi bread? And I went, no, like pita bread? And she goes, no, it's thicker, and it's usually got sesame seeds on it, and it's very different. And I said, I haven't had that at all. So as we pull up to go to the election monitoring site, there's a bakery there. And so I say to the military guys, when we're done, can we go in the bakery and grab some bread? And they're like, no. And it's like 20 years ago, they created a bakery on the off chance some American would wander in, you know? So anyway, so as I'm arguing with the guys, we go in, and the election is in a school. And it looks like the schools, probably everybody in this room's voted at one time. You go up sort of those heavy marble granite steps, And on the walls are pictures kids have drawn, just I've got a granddaughter who's 5 now, loves to color everything. And we walk up to sort of check in, and there's a table, and sitting behind it are 4 women in folding chairs. And the woman who was the Lebanese interpreter points at the bag there, and she says, that's what the Iraqi bread looks like. And the woman behind the counter looks at her and speaks in Arabic and says, well, what were you talking about? She said, I was explaining to him what the Iraqi bread was. Yeah, well, this was a big mistake. Suddenly paper bags and plastic bag came out from everybody who worked in the polling place like my grandmother did. And before I knew it, I had cookies and cheese and bread. I couldn't even talk to anybody. I was carrying this whole bag of food walking around. But what the Iraqis had to do is you had to dye your thumb purple and put it on your vote in order to clarify it. And so it told me 2 things about how simple election security can be and how much elections made to that country.
Good afternoon. My name is Matt Nink. Thanks so much for being here, for the presentation, for the work. It's so important. The Fairness Doctrine was tossed out in 1986. You've alluded to the internet, but I just wonder what you both think about that particular law and its contribution to the current climate of polarization.
Okay, so I worked in television for years, so I know well what the Fairness Doctrine is. I'm not a fan of the Fairness Doctrine. I think in a multiplicity of outlets these days, newspapers, magazines, radio stations, websites, podcasts, YouTube, any position you want to find in the country, you have to do it. And I think the idea that the government would have, Tom Gibbs, are they going to go now in the Jimmy Fallon show and say, well, you got to do a joke that makes fun of Joe Biden? I meant, just to have private equity because of the fight that's now going on with the Trumps. So I don't think we'll bring it back, and I don't think there's a necessity for it.
I think whether you agree with it or not, I didn't like the change at the time, so obviously we're from different sides of the aisle, but I would agree that right now you have so many different outlets, and that's part of the problem. I think without a doubt that you have a different view of reality depending on what television in particular or streaming service you're watching, but it's your choice. I had a mother-in-law who I love very, very much who slept with Fox News on TV. And I'm sure there are other people here who have done that, and others who would live and die by media on the left. And so I think that's just the world we live in today, is that you're going to choose who you want to listen to, and you're going to create your own reality. The question, and now again, back then, hitting on AI again, because one of the things that I was just reading in the last 24 hours, in addition to the other AI thing, was how AI has this massive potential to influence even more and more discreetly. And so that's a coming concern.
Hi, I'm Corinne Reno, Taxman. I have a question for all 3 of you. You have a room full of people who want to make elections fair. What would you tell us would be the one thing that we can do to help you in your efforts, other than joining you or sending money? What's something that we could do? We're so polarized. When I went to vote this week, last month, everybody was quiet. And normally there's hello and cookies. Everyone is so afraid of showing their views. What would you tell us we should do?
Go ahead.
So, really, that's really an issue on college campuses. If you spend any time on the college campuses, it's hard to get students to speak up and to ask questions because they're all on eggshells worrying they're going to offend the next person and end up, people canceling their email or posting stuff about them and everything else. The thing you could do, I think frankly, they need more poll workers. A lot of people have quit over all the drama and sort of the horror of the last several years. And so I think working as a poll worker, if you're a Republican or a Democrat, and feel free to indicate which party you are, election observers are badly needed. And so in most polls, you have a Republican and Democrat just watching the process. So I take it down to sort of the grassroots level and say those are the 2 things we need, is we need smart people in the polls and we need good election watchers. So at the end of the day, when somebody challenges something, there'll have been a Republican or a Democrat who watched whatever it was and tried to resolve the issue.
And I think if we could reduce the average age of the election workers from 85 to 83, that would be a huge step forward. And it tells you we have a demographic issue coming in the future as well. So I agree.
Hi, my name's Hannah. I am a poll worker for the last 2 years, and it's
you very
been
much.
amazing. You can
We
be-
planted her early, just so you know.
Yes.
She doesn't belong to Rotary. She's just here to play this role.
Exactly, you got it. So I've been a poll worker for the last 2 years. I love it. I do a half day. Some people do a full day, and actually there was probably of the 15 of us there, 10 of us were under 40. So any age, you can be a poll worker. Can you tell us how you can become a poll worker in Milwaukee?
Contact the City of Milwaukee Elections Commission, and they will happily help you out. So I'm going to have you come back. I want you to, can you tell us what your experience has been, please? Turn the tables on you, see how you like it.
Does she only get 30 seconds? Okay.
She has 39 seconds, okay.
39. I love being a poll worker. I can do it right at the elementary school near my home. I can walk there. People bring snacks, like you said. One lady was making sandwiches. And everybody was really nice. And I didn't know anybody's political affiliation, but I knew that they cared about Milwaukee. You can choose to serve on some election boards, and I wasn't going to do it this time, but they were texting like every day. And I'm like, okay, all right, I'll take a half day for work. So if you have questions, I'd be more than happy to chat with people interested.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Let's give her a round of applause.
You know, that's a classic Wisconsin attitude. It's interesting, as I grew up in Milwaukee, my dad was always very active in politics, used to belong to the Rotary in West Dallas and when the American Legion and all that, but my dad said he loved politics so much when he died, he wanted to be buried in Chicago so he could stay politically active. But anyway.
Jeff Smoller, do you have any thoughts on some of the theories about migration between and among states and gerrymandered districts, so we basically end up in America with red states and blue states and no purple states?
Yeah, well, if you look at the number of battleground states, it keeps shrinking, right? So we're operating in 8, and I'm really not sure why they picked Ohio, because I'm not sure I really believe that Ohio's much of a battleground state, but, Iowa, Wisconsin are very much so, New Hampshire is down the list. One of the interesting, and I'll let Tom talk about gerrymandering, but one of the things I think is interesting that people aren't keeping an eye on, and there's now these gerrymander fights going on in legislatures to try to move 2 legislators here and everybody else in the world. The big challenge for Democrats is going to be the census in 2030. Just because of the social mobility around the country, more people are in Arizona, more people are in Florida, more people are in Texas, more people in Arkansas. And so most projections are, at a minimum, Republicans will pick up 15 seats simply because the demographic move around the country, and the seats will come out of Massachusetts and New York and, the northern states, New Jersey, that people are bailing on.
But there are changes, and I don't think it's a snapshot that stays the same. Going back to when I was elected to Congress, I think my first term in Congress, there were, I might be off by 1 or 2 of this, there were 7 Democrats and 2 Republicans from Georgia. In 1994, the year that Newt Gingrich came in, it swung 8-1 the other way. And now if you look at Georgia, a state that was deeply red for many, many years, it is truly a battleground state. I think this year, depending on who wins the primary in Texas for the Senate seat, or maybe regardless, I think that Senate seat is going to be very much contested. Ohio was Democrat, became a purple state, then became a red state. Now it's trending back the other way. So I think that there are changes that are coming. But I would agree that the demographic shift is certainly from the north to the south. I've seen articles that anticipate that we will lose another congressional seat in Wisconsin in 2030 because our population has not kept up with the growth in Arizona and Georgia and other places. So I think that that's part of the flow, this centuries-long flow of how things change in the U.S.
I don't like all this sort of midterm partisanship and redistricting. I mean, the Constitution gives the power to the states to do it. I just think it sends the wrong signal, and I'd stand up and applaud Maryland, which didn't do it, which is a Democratic state, and Indiana, which didn't do it, which is a very Republican state. So I'm sort of disappointed in the gamesmanship that goes on.
My name is Dan Nelson. Picking up on the battleground state question, according to Google at least, Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin are generally the swing states that decide presidential elections. 6 of 7 are part of the Democracy Defense Project. Is that a coincidence, or why do you think that is?
I think that the people who formed the organization decided that those were the states that were most important. Again, when I got the call, just because I want to do my due diligence, I really thought, okay, what's going on here? Is this legit? And truly, when I saw the list of people from those other states, I was convinced that it's a legitimate organization, because there's people with political backgrounds, but I didn't consider anybody that I saw what I would call a political firebrand from either side. I thought these are people who are, and they probably were criticized in their various states sometimes for not being too far left or too far right. That was my take.
Yeah, I think that subset of, not only can you do that with states, which you can actually pick cities around the country that will decide. I mean, Erie, Pennsylvania, Rockford, Illinois go back and forth almost every election with remarkable consistency, and almost nearly always pick the winners. And I think that's where we are. It's a shame that we've got just this narrow set, but in a lot of cases, it's people who self-selected one another, right? They want a neighborhood that's very blue or a neighborhood that's very red or whatever the motivation might be. So we've sort of done it to ourselves, but when I first got elected, there was a census the next time, so they'd redistricted in 92. We had to pass the hat around to the Republican members in the delegation. There were 5 of us and 4 Democrats, I think, when I got in. And because we had to hire a computer programmer to do it. Now you can buy redistricting software off the shelf and get it from Amazon in an hour and a half. And so it's made it more precise, but more malleable, and I think in a bad way. I'd like to see many more battleground seats in the state and see many more battleground states federally too.
Thank you. My name is Fred. I noticed that your organization says that the goal is to restore faith in public elections. It doesn't say fix the mathematical process or anything like that. So I would believe that we're in a room full of people who believe that elections are fair, and I'm hoping that we can get more people to believe that. But is the lack of faith impacting voter turnout? Is the lack of faith in the election, reducing the number of people who still come to vote?
I think it's actually climbing the last several elections. I was talking about the 1800s and one of the elections where somebody got elected who won the Electoral College, not the popular vote. The turnout, I think it's in 1876, was 86%. So it went down, and for a while it was trending below 50, but now I think it's coming back again, so I think that's a sign. It may be that partisanship that's out there is whipped up everybody and got them more involved because they see there's more at stake in the elections. I don't have more to add to that.
And some of it's a reflection on how much attention an election gets. If you look at this year's Wisconsin Supreme Court election, one would argue that there's less interest. But remember the one a year ago, that there was so much money spent on that election, and there was more at stake. So I think a lot of it has to do with stake. I would argue this year that you'll see a highly charged Democratic base coming out to vote. But I think 2 years ago, you had, because President Biden was losing people to the left and the right, I think that his numbers were depressed, not only because the Republicans were against him, but I think there was a not insignificant number of Democrats who frankly didn't like his position on Israel. I think that had an impact on him.
Gentlemen, thank you again for coming. My name is Alex Zamora. I go back to your comments about the efficiency and the process for Milwaukee in counting the ballots and everything. And going back to my knowledge of Schoolhouse Rock and how bills become laws, what would it take for something like that to be put to the state to vote on? Because if it's, to your point, Representative Klug, about the conspiracy theory in making Milwaukee to be the boogeyman, right? If the state was making a vote on, hey, we should have this standardized.
Well, I think that, first of all, referendums in the state of Wisconsin are not binding. So California has it where you can say this law should be. In fact, we just passed a bill, it's going to get on the ballot about a higher billionaire tax. I don't remember if it's in California or wherever it is. So you can't bind it here. You can do it as an advisory, but to even do an advisory referendum, you know this better than Paul. How many signatures you need? You have to do it. It's got to come to the legislature twice.
Yeah, but that would not be the way to go. It's going to take the legislature, and I think it's inevitable that it's going to happen. The question is, and right now there's guests that the Senate will be controlled by the Democrats, so it could happen. But I think, again, if you live in a Republican district, to let the Republicans know. If you live in a Democratic district, let them know. Just change this law. It is a total no-brainer, a total no-brainer.
And if you look at the last session, I mean, I think my sense would be that Robin Voss wanted it as an issue, and Evers had no interest in getting it done. And so it's just, you know, there's a bipartisan bill that's out there that's been like a lot of bipartisan bills that try to do it for 30 years without success. I'd reach out to your own individual legislator and tell them you want to have it done.
Thank you.
Thank you all.